Section 3, the last section of Chapter 8, is about the reactions of photosynthesis. It's actually the most important and in-depth section of the entire chapter. So it's got a lot of important things about the steps of photosynthesis and the reactions. So inside the chloroplast is where photosynthesis occurs. Inside the chloroplast there are sac-like photosynthetic membranes called thylakoids. The thylakoids are arranged into stacks known as grana, and the thylakoids contain clusters of chlorophyll and other pigments and protein known as photosystems that are able to capture the energy of sunlight. So these pigments are going to take that sun's energy from different wavelengths of light. So chlorophyll is the most common pigment. Okay, it's green, and so it's going to absorb blue-violet the best and red-orange the best, but it's going to absorb green very poorly because it's reflecting the green. But as we'll see in the chromatography lab, there are actually other color pigments, yellow pigment and orange pigment, that will allow for the absorption of all wavelengths of light. There are two types of reactions in photosynthesis, the light-dependent and the light-independent reaction. The light-independent is known as the Calvin cycle. Light-dependent reaction takes place within the thylakoid membrane, and the Calvin cycle takes place in the stroma region outside the thylakoid membranes. So we take a look right here at this diagram. We see that the light-dependent reaction, they're showing the thylakoids, and then they're just showing the blank space as where the Calvin cycle occurs. So that's the stroma. Okay, and we see that light and water go into the light-dependent reaction, and we see that oxygen is going to come out of the light-dependent reaction. We also see that CO2 goes into the Calvin cycle, and sugars come out. Now, NADP is a carrier molecule of high-energy electrons. So what NADP is going to do is it's going to accept and hold two high-energy electrons along with an H+ ion. This converts NADP to NADPH. This conversion is one of the ways that some of the energy of sunlight can be trapped in chemical form. So these electrons are going to be energized using the sun's energy, and they are going to be used to help power the light-independent reaction. So NADPH can then carry high-energy electrons produced by light absorption in the chlorophyll to chemical reactions elsewhere in the cell. Those electrons are used to help build a variety of molecules the cell needs, including carbohydrates like glucose. The light-dependent reactions require light. The light-dependent reactions produce oxygen gas, convert ADP and NADP into ATP and NADPH. So taking a look right here, here's what's happening. So we see this first part, photosystem 1. And light and water are going to enter into photosystem 1. And that water is going to be broken apart into hydrogen and oxygen. Now those oxygens are going to be released into the atmosphere, whereas those hydrogens are going to be placed on the hydrogens are going to be placed in the membrane, and electrons are going to be removed from them and placed in the electron transport chain. And this is going to move, the electron transport chain moves the electrons to photosystem 1, where they're energized again by sun's energy, and NADPH is created. Now, we're going to have the hydrogen ions build up in the membrane, creating a charge differential. All right? And what's going to then happen is they're going to move through a channel called ATP synthase, which is going to be used to form ATP. Now, the Calvin cycle is the next part. We're going to take the ATP and NADPH created in the first reaction, the light-dependent reaction, and we're going to use them to power the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle, plants use the energy that ATP and NADPH contain to build high-energy compounds that can be stored for a long time. The Calvin cycle uses ATP and NADPH from the light-dependent reactions to produce high-energy sugars. Okay, so if we take a look right here, the list of steps, I'd like you to copy this down, right? Get all these steps copied down, but they're also found on the next slide that we're going to look at right now, and we're going to follow the light-independent reaction, also known as the Calvin cycle, step by step. So once you copy this down, we'll move right on to the next slide, and they're also found right here. So take a look right here. We have CO2, 6 CO2s entering, okay, the reaction here. Okay, so what we have is we take the 6 5-carbon molecule that's already in there, and we mix them together with the 6 CO2s we bring in, so that gives us 36, and then we make 12 3-carbon molecules we rearranged. So basically what I need you to take away from this is that there are carbons that are always in the reaction. We take 6 CO2s, enter them into the Calvin cycle, and as it moves along, eventually at the bottom here, we see that we created a 6-carbon sugar, okay, glucose. And then we end up using the ATP, the NADPH, and ATP again to form this, to have this reaction occur. Okay, so the energy produced in the first reaction, the light-dependent reaction, is used to create the sugar. Now this is just a diagram showing the ins and outs. All right, so we see that water and sunlight go into the light-dependent reaction. Oxygen comes out. ATP comes out of the light-dependent reaction, goes to the light-independent reaction. Same with NADPH. The light-independent reaction takes in carbon dioxide and gives off glucose. Now there's some factors affecting photosynthesis, water or lack of water. We can see how the lack of water would prevent there from being the breakdown of the water molecule, so that's necessary. Temperature, if it's too cold, obviously the reaction will move at a slower or faster rate depending on the hotness or coldness. And the intensity of light, so that will affect the rate of photosynthesis. So the more light, chances are you'll have more photosynthesis. If there's very little light, there's very little photosynthesis going to be able to occur.